prosecutes the suit, in effect, what you'll wind up doing is having half of your attorney's fees paid by the beneficiary that was just not doing anything.
Right. Okay. How long does it take to administer a typical estate or trust?
Well, it depends. And if it's a probate situation, be it where there's no will and no trust, excuse me, if it's a probate situation where there's a will but no trust, or no will at all, usually you have to keep it open a minimum of about 6 months, 4 months to basically take care of the claims of creditors. If the estate is more than $3.5 million, then there may have to be a federal estate tax. There certainly has to be a federal estate tax return. And that return and that tax is not due until 9 months after death. Now, during that 9-month period of time, you don't have to pay interest on the tax. So, therefore, there's no good reason to pay the tax early. So in those situations, the estate will stay open probably for a minimum of 9 months. Now, even whether there's a will or a trust, there are provisions for making what are called either preliminary or partial distributions. And usually what the fiduciary, which is a generalized term for the personal representative of a decedent's estate or a trustee, does is he looks and sees how much money's there. And if he can make some partial distributions, he does. And if the estate's $3.5 million, and how long it takes to distribute it depends a lot upon, well, of course, if there's a lawsuit.
Yes.
If there's a lawsuit over the estate, it could be tied up for a year in Superior Court, and in the Court of Appeal in this county, it could take up to another 3 years on top of that.
Right.
If there's real estate, sometimes you have to sell the real estate, and that takes time. If there's a business, a closely held business, that's very difficult because it's often hard to sell a small business in which the decedent was the primary mover and shaker.
Right.
So you figure that if the estate's well over $3 million or significantly over $3 million, it'll take about 9 months to a year minimum. If the estate's smaller than that, it'll take usually about 6 months. The point is that the fiduciary, by law, is given a, quote, reasonable period of time, close quote, to administer the estate. You, the beneficiary, of course, want the estate to be closed as soon as possible. Obviously, if it's closed sooner rather than later, there's less attorney's fees that wind up getting paid.
Right.
And you get to spend the money. On the other hand, even in whether it's a will or a trust, the fiduciary has a duty to make it income producing. He can't just let it sit there fallow, so to speak. He's got to put it in interest-bearing accounts. So theoretically, from that point of view, if you don't get it all within a year, you at least get the interest that was earned on it during that 1 year period of time. But again, human nature being what it is and lawyers being what they are, you as the beneficiary want to regularly check in with the trustee or his attorney to ask if you can make a partial distribution.
Right. So I was just thinking, we were saying that if you have an estate tax return due in 9 months, but quite often they have like a 6-month extension. And so, but I think that if you get it settled in a year, you're doing pretty well, I guess is what it boils down to.
Yeah. If you get all the money distributed within a year, that's very, 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 very fast.
Yeah. Okay. What suggestions do you have to keep peace in a family of a decedent who had children from multiple marriages or relationships?
Well, there's an old saying, it only takes one person to fight. It takes at least 2 people to settle. If there are more than 2 people, any one of them can be a problem. You can't, people think that, well, the courts will impose a settlement, or there's some way to impose a settlement. You can't impose a settlement. You can't make people settle. You can make them go to trial, and the judge can then enter a decision which they can appeal, but you can't make them settle it. The best thing you can do is try to persuade people to get along. Now, there's some people that do a very good job of that. In fact, they're becoming more and more common. They're loosely called mediators. These are often retired judges, attorneys that have decided not to do litigation but to do mediation, that you can contact and ask them to help you out with this. Most mediators don't get involved with estate proceedings, but there is a category of professional called a private professional fiduciary.
Yes.
This is a relatively new category that's come around the last 10 to 20 years. In the old days, most estates were administered by banks. Then as time went on, the banks stopped wanting to do that kind of work, primarily because of the lawsuits.
Yes.
Also because of things like toxic problems on real estate. They didn't want to get involved with that.
Right.
In the meantime, people who had used to work for the banks or worked for the government went out as, in effect, sole practitioners and agreed to administer the estate for the same fees you would otherwise have to pay to a trustee or an executor. And these people, and I know a number of them, are extremely adept at being able to work with families. I've seen them do things with families that, despite the fact that I've been working in this area for 30 years, I never could have come close to resolving. But the problem still is how to get everybody, or at least the people that are most inclined to fight, to talk to that fiduciary. In a second marriage situation, for example, men hate to be alone in the second half of their life.
Yes.
They want to remarry quickly, especially if they had a good marriage to begin with. They're used to that. They don't want to be alone. And then their spouse often rightly thinks that they should get most of everything and are reluctant to deal with the children by the prior marriage, thinking that I shouldn't have to deal with these people. Well, as I pointed out to you earlier, they do. If, for example, a child by the prior marriage approaches the widow and saying, listen, I know this is uncomfortable for you, but theoretically I understand there's supposed to be some estate proceedings. If you don't feel comfortable talking to me, maybe we can talk to one of these private professional fiduciaries. And she may or may not be more receptive to that kind of thing, as opposed to showing up at the funeral and pulling on her dress and saying, when do I get my money, for example. Those private professional fiduciaries are really outstanding, and they can do fantastic things. Whether they wind up administering the estate or not, they can often work with people in such a way that they diffuse that suspicion, hostility, and anger. Theoretically, lawyers are supposed to do that as well, but lawyers often take the attitude that, and by the way, to this extent the lawyers are right. People think the lawyer is the lawyer for the estate. That's not true. There is really no legal concept called lawyer for the estate. There may be a trustee, there may be an executor, maybe the surviving spouse, might be a child. The attorney represents a person, as opposed to an estate. So if the widow goes to a lawyer to represent her as the trustee, that lawyer is her lawyer. He doesn't represent the children, even if the children are in part beneficiaries. Now, he's not supposed to lie to them, he's not supposed to mislead them, but he takes his position, his role as, I'm her attorney, not yours. I'm supposed to protect her, not you. I'm supposed to help her. Helping you is secondary.
Okay, Mike, we're going to have to wrap it up. I really appreciate you coming today. One thing I want people to know is, although Mike is a great hired gun as an estate litigator, he's also a hell of a nice guy, and I really enjoy the time that I spend with Mike. So again, thank you very much, Mike, for doing this interview with me. Mike has a website. It's www.desmarais, it's spelled DESMARIS, law.com. Did I get it?
You missed three of the last three letters.
Oh, no. Desmarais, R-A-I-S, right?
A-I-S, yes.
A-I-S, I'm sorry. And then you can also write to me. It's Michael at financialinsiderweekly.com. See you next time. Thanks for watching.
Thank you, Mike.